Hello. Today I will be reading Chapter 6 of Encyclopedia Brown. Chapter 6 is called The Case of the Happy Nephew. Case of the Happy Nephew. The Browns were having leftover meatloaf for dinner one night when the telephone rang. "It must be important," said Mrs. Brown worriedly. "Otherwise, why would anyone call during the dinner hour?" She hurried to the telephone. In a moment she called to her husband. "It's Officer Carlson, dear." Chief Brown went to the telephone and spoke with his officer for several minutes. When he returned to the dining room, he wore a frown and his gun. "The Princess Bake Shop on Vine Street was robbed less than an hour ago," he said. "I'll have to go out." "Any clues, Dad?" asked Encyclopedia. "We have an eyewitness," answered his father. "A man passing the bakery says he saw John Abbott running out the door." "Hasn't John Abbott been in prison?" asked Mrs. Brown. 5 years ago," said Chief Brown, "but he's gone straight ever since he came out. The eyewitness only got a quick look at the robber. He might be mistaken." Chief Brown shrugged. "Still, I suppose I'll have to stop by and question John. I hope he has a good alibi." "Can I go with you?" cried Encyclopedia. "May I go with you?" his mother said. "And drink your milk first." "May I go with you, Dad?" Encyclopedia asked. He gulped his milk. "Come along if you'd like," said his father. "But you will have to stay in the car and be quiet." "I'll be as quiet as a cat at a dog show," promised Encyclopedia. He sat quietly beside his father in the police car on the drive to the house where John Abbott lived with his sister and her family. Okay. Staying in the car won't be so bad, Encyclopedia decided. The car will be a lot closer to the case than our dining room. On the west side of town, his father stopped the car. "Here's the house." Encyclopedia saw a small white house in need of paint. An old yellow car stood in the shaded driveway. Okay. "There's John," said Chief Brown. A tall young man had come out of the house. He was carrying a barefoot boy about a year and a half old. It's like a toddler. Chief Brown reminded the Encyclopedia to sit quietly in the car. Then he got out and walked toward John Abbott. "Put the child down, John," Chief Brown called, "and keep your hands where I can see 'em." John Abbott started to lower the barefoot baby onto the sharp stones of the gravel driveway. Then he changed his mind and put the child on the front fender of the yellow car and raised his hands. "What's this all about, Chief?" he asked. "Robbery," replied the Chief Brown. "You were seen running out of the Princess Bake Shop on Vine Street an hour ago. The door was broken and all the money in the cash register was stolen." John Abbott laughed. "I wasn't near Vine Street an hour ago. Why, all day." "Look out!" shouted Chief Brown. He leaped for the baby. The child had climbed onto the hood of the yellow car. He smiled and gurgled happily. Suddenly he stood up and walked close to the edge of the hood. Chief Brown caught him just as he started to fall off the car. "Thanks, Chief," said John Abbott. "He's my nephew. I'll hold him." "No, I'll hold him," said Chief Brown. "Just tell me where you were today." And here's a picture of, this looks like the chief. And there's that 1.5-year-old. He looks more like a 4-year-old, but that's okay. And this is John Abbott. And he's catching the baby. Okay. So the chief says, "Just tell me where you were today." Anyone who says he saw me coming out of the Princess Bake Shop an hour ago is either crazy or a liar," said John Abbott. "Can you prove you were somewhere else?" "I was miles away," said John Abbott. "Since 8 o'clock this morning, I've been driving this car. I drove down from Sundale Shores. I got here just 5 minutes before you came." Chief Brown looked at his watch. "You drove 600 miles in less than 12 hours? He said, did you stop around 6 o'clock and talk to anybody? Somebody we can check your story with? No, not around 6 o'clock, said John Abbott. I stopped for gas and a hamburger about 4:30. Then I drove straight through. I didn't break any speed limit. I had nothing to do with any bake shop robbery. I'd like to think you are telling the truth, said Chief Brown. I am. I've gone straight. Believe me, said John Abbott. All right, said Chief Brown. I'll have to question the eyewitness who says he saw you. Maybe it'll turn out that he isn't sure. Chief Brown put the baby in John Abbott's arms and walked back to the police car. I heard and saw everything, Dad, said Encyclopedia. How come you didn't arrest him? Because he was driving from Sundale Shores when the robbery took place, answered Chief Brown. He got there just 5 minutes before we came. I can't prove he's lying, at least not yet. He slipped into the seat beside Encyclopedia and started the car. Listen to me, Leroy, he said. Our eyewitness may have made a mistake. He may have seen a man who only looked like John Abbott. A good police officer doesn't put people in jail without more proof than that. I believe the witness, said Encyclopedia. John Abbott did not just drive in from Sundale. Did not just drive in from Sundale Shores in that old yellow car. I can prove he didn't. What is the proof? Dun, dun, dun. What's the proof? Think about it. What's the proof? I know the proof. Okay, but I'll read it to you, page 84. What's the proof? The solution to the case of the happy nephew. John Abbott said he had reached his sister's house only 5 minutes before Chief Brown arrived. If John had just driven from Sundale Shores, the motor and hood of his car would still have been burning hot. Remember, he said he only made one stop for hamburger and gas during the 12-hour trip. If that was true, his little nephew, who was barefoot, would have cried out in pain when he stood on the hot hood of the car. Instead, the baby smiled and gurgled happily. Therefore, the hood was not hot. A cool hood, that's like the top part of the car that covers the engine. The cool hood meant the car had not just been parked after a 12-hour drive, as John Abbott said. So that's the proof that John Abbott was lying, and he was the robber of the bakery. Okay, that's it for today. So I hope you're taking some notes on these chapters so that you can remember them, so that when we're done with the book, you can take the AR test. This one, of course, was called The Case of the Happy Nephew. And Encyclopedia is cracking cases left and right. Okay, bye-bye.